Slavs not civilized yet, but enter history through contact with civilized people. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote about Slavs. Procopius was a contemporary of the Emperor Justinian. He wrote that Slavs are not ruled by one man. They have lived from of old under a democracy. Now, it's normal for civilized people to observe that people in tribal societies have a more egalitarian social structure, but Procopius's use of the term democracy is notable because while the Greeks didn't do democracy anymore, Alexander the Great had put a stop to that, Procopius knew what democracy was. So we'll be looking for evidence of Slavic tribal democracy in later Slavic civilizations. Procopius wrote, "Slavs believe that one God, the maker of lightning, is alone Lord of all things, and they sacrifice to him cattle and all other victims." There on the right is a 9-foot-tall Slavic religious idol. And indeed, archaeological evidence shows that Slavs sacrificed not just animals, but also humans occasionally to their gods. Procopius, "Slavs live in pitiful hovels which they set up far apart from one another." These are modern reconstructions of ancient Slavic dwellings, early medieval. "Slavs speak an utterly barbarous tongue." So Procopius is still Greek, considering any non-Greek language is a barbaric language. "They live a hard life, giving no heed to bodily comforts. They are continually and at all times covered with filth." But Procopius praised their moral character. "They are in no respect base or evildoers. They preserve the Hunnic character in all its simplicity." Here Procopius is falsely suggesting that the Huns were related to the Slavs. They were not. Totally different language groups and cultures. This is a modern reconstruction of a Slavic hill fort. Slavs favored wood for construction of forts and palaces because stones were in short supply on the plains of East Europe. The drawback, of course, is that wooden palaces and forts can be set on fire. Here are some examples of Slavic art and Slavic pottery, which, to be fair, is fairly crude compared to, say, Greek pottery from 1600 years before that. As the Slavic migration proceeds, Slavic splinters into several different languages. All the languages shown on the map are Slavic languages. They are grouped as follows. The West Slavs include the Poles, the Sorbians, the Czechs, the Slovaks. The South Slavs include the Slovenians, the Serbs, the Croats, the Bulgarians, and the Macedonians. Yes, the Macedonians are Slavs and not, in fact, descendants of Alexander the Great. The East Slavs include the Belarusians, the Russians, and the Ukrainians. Here is the Byzantine Empire before the Slavic migrations. Now it reaches its maximum extent under Justinian, but then Slavic invasions come at the expense of Byzantine power in the Balkans. Note that, and then they come back and retake the Balkans, absorbing many South Slavs. Note that the Byzantine Empire has reclaimed a toehold up here on the Crimean Peninsula on the north shore of the Black Sea, which they hold on to quite late until they vanish entirely. Here's a look at Europe at the death of Charlemagne in 814. Some good news now. Some Slavs have set up civilizations. The West Slav Czechs have set up the state of Bohemia. The South Slavs, Serbs, have Serbia. The Bulgarians have conquered a large empire centered on the Carpathian Plain. But many Slavs not so lucky. Some West Slavs and South Slavs have been conquered by the Franks. Others have been conquered by Turkic people, including the Khazars. You do have some Slavic tribes free but not yet civilized. And this is your reminder that Slavs were the main victim of Europe's slave trade. Europe so poor and backward for much of the Middle Ages that their only attractive export for the more advanced Muslim world was selling humans. Slavs, being relatively weak, were the favored victims both of the Franks and of the Byzantine Empire. Later, the Vikings jump into the Slavic slave trade to the point where the English word slave is derived from the word Slav. Slav originally is an autonym. It's a name the Slavs call themselves and other people who speak Slavic languages, but because Slavs are so often enslaved, it becomes, well, slaves. Now, for comparison purposes, the Slavs here have a modest beginning for civilization. We have the thriving Muslim civilization of the Middle Ages that stretches from Spain across North Africa and across Southwest and South Asia. The Gupta Empire in India, spreading the Sanskrit cosmopolis across Southeast Asia. Increasing advanced civilization in China under the Shui and Tang dynasties, digging the Grand Canal. Europe, a relative backwater developmentally speaking, and the Slavs less developed than the rest of Europe. A few decades later, the first East Slav civilization emerges. It's called Kievan Rus. Its founder is Rurik, a Varangian Viking. That is, he's Viking, Norseman, raider, slave trader, Varangian, former Byzantine mercenary, well acquainted with Byzantine culture. These are essential credentials for leadership. The story goes that Slavic chiefs asked Rurik and his brothers to lead them. Why? So they can get rich by attacking Constantinople, the richest city in their known world. This Byzantine art shows the Rus coming across the Black Sea to Constantinople, where a heroic Byzantine soldier is defending the city with a skeleton crew as the emperor rides to the rescue. Except, well, why is the emperor not home? Well, the Rus timing was impeccable. The emperor, Michael III, known to history as the Drunkard, had taken the Byzantine army into Asia Minor. He was invading the Arab Abbasid Empire, trying to reclaim Anatolia for the Byzantine Empire. But of course, the Rus have come across the Black Sea, so if the army's gone, what about the navy? Oh, the Byzantine navy is gone too, down in the Aegean and Mediterranean seas, fighting Arabs and Normans. So the Rus have showed up, and Constantinople is barely defended. The patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church, Photius, wrote that the Rus took them by total surprise. He likened it to a thunderbolt from heaven, compared the Rus to a swarm of wasps descending upon the city. Like many ancient medieval cities, Constantinople had outgrown its walls, so many people were living outside the city walls, and they got killed. The Rus rampaged through those neighborhoods, looting, butchering people, torching the buildings. They couldn't get through the walls of Constantinople, but they sacked a major monastery nearby. A retired patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church was in that monastery. They took 24 captives back to their ships and chopped them up with axes, reminiscent of Viking attacks on Western European monasteries. But then it was a miracle. Constantinople was saved. This shows the patriarch Photius with the veil of the Virgin Mary, the Mother of Christ. He dips it in the Black Sea, and it raises a tempest, a great storm, that drives away the Rus. Maybe. Other sources record that the Vikings, having sacked Constantinople suburbs and that monastery, left without being punished. So the miracle might be an after-the-fact invention. Now, meanwhile, Kievan Rus, over time, is expanding. It's called Kievan Rus because Kiev becomes the capital of the state. Now, this growth is achieved through a mixture of alliances, extortion of tribute, or outright conquest. This is a map from Chapter 9, showing Kievan Rus as part of the sort of Viking world. You can see the Viking slave trade routes running through Kievan Rus and Eastern Europe, slaves going down for sale to the Byzantines and thence to the Muslim world. Which brings us to another nagging question of Slavic history. Was Kievan Rus culturally Slavic or Norse? This comes back to the traditional condescending Western concept of Slavs as underdeveloped. Yeah, the Slavs couldn't figure out civilization for themselves, so they needed the Vikings, the least civilized people in Western Europe, to come and show them how to do it. Let's look at the evidence. Kievan Rus culturally super Slavic. There are very few Norse loanwords in Russian or Ukrainian, and the Rurik dynasty made no effort to introduce the worship of Norse gods. They let the Slavs continue to worship their own pagan gods, and indeed joined in the worship of those pagan gods. So clearly, the Slav majority was able to absorb and assimilate a very small Norse elite that quickly becomes Slavicized. Slavified? However, there is evidence of significant Norse influence. Now, we've already seen that Procopius called tribal Slavs democratic. And indeed, Kievan Rus had something in common with the Bulgarian Empire in that they practiced feudalism, but instead of having serfs, that is, bound peasants, who could be sold or traded between nobles, the Bulgarians and the Kievan Rus had feudalism with free peasants who had, more rights than your standard issue Western European peasant. So that's notable, and that's clearly Slavic. But Kievan Rus had something else that Bulgaria did not have. It had democratic town councils which looked a lot like Norse village things, that is, assemblies where all the free men in town can come and deliberate and debate and reach consensus on major issues. Now that's local democracy, right? As a kingdom, it's feudal, and there's kings and nobles running the show, but you have an instance of local democracy that looks like Norse influence to me. By now, the Byzantine Empire is tired of getting attacked by pagan Slavs. So they send missionaries, the most famous being Cyril and Methodius, into the Balkans to evangelize the South Slavs, to bring them into the Eastern Orthodox Church. Cyril and Methodius developed the Cyrillic alphabet, to a writing system for putting the Bible and other documents into Slavic languages, and this is a stimulus for civilization both in the immediate area and then later on in other Slavic areas. It also brings the Balkans closer to the Byzantine cultural orbit. And that concludes part 2.